A huge weather pattern change is coming to the United States over the next few days, and this will lead to even more significant severe weather in areas like the Great Plains and then eventually towards the Midwest and the Mississippi River Valley, where more damaging winds, large hail, and tornadoes will be a possibility. Additionally, a very warm stretch of weather is ahead, which will only fuel the potential for severe weather as we go into late April and as well as early May. So in today's forecast, we are going to break down exactly what you need to know about the weather that'll be impacting the United States over the next 7 to 10 days, and we'll begin with what's happening across the country today. And currently we have a very organized low pressure system all the way back up into the Midwest, which is continuing to bring some showers and thunderstorms anywhere from the Ohio Valley back into the deep south. And we actually do have a low end risk of severe weather today, including areas like Ohio and Pennsylvania, in addition to Mississippi and Alabama, where isolated hail, wind, and a brief tornado are going to be possible as this low pressure system continues to move off to the east. One important thing I want to note is that we pretty much have very strong high pressure back over along the east coast, which is going to help to weaken this low pressure system throughout the daytime today. But before that happens, we should be able to see a couple of severe storms, and we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. And for the time being, the Great Plains is looking great. It is very nice weather today, but that is not going to last long, because as we go into tomorrow and Wednesday, we are expecting the return of severe weather. Over the weekend, we had a couple of severe weather outbreaks, and on Saturday we had over a dozen tornado reports back over in Texas and Oklahoma. A small-scale tornado outbreak took place, and even back over in the Northeast, a little bit of a surprise here, but we had a long-tracked area of storms that both produced a lot of different wind and wind damage reports back over in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and as well as New York. And then on yesterday's severe weather event, we didn't have nearly as many tornado reports, but this is still a number that I think will increase, because we at least had a few tornadoes in central Missouri that have not yet been accounted for on this map. But we had a lot of different wind reports of over 100, in addition to 6 tornado reports so far in both Illinois, Missouri, and Arkansas. And then this little outlier back up in Montana, we actually had a reported landspout yesterday, which is kind of shocking. This is nowhere near where our severe weather risk was yesterday. Now let's talk more about the weather pattern that'll be impacting the United States over the next couple of weeks. And to look at that, we are going to look at the jet stream. So as of today, our jet stream is actually fairly quiet. This is not usually typical for mid to late April, but we have a pretty weak jet stream right now across the northern and central plains. And our low pressure system that brought that severe weather is now moving up into Canada. And notice what happens by the middle of this week. We have a very flat and zonal jet stream, which usually means that we will not be talking about much significant severe weather. However, there will be mesoscale features, basically meaning small scale features that will lead to severe weather in the Great Plains, where you have a lot of moisture and instability, and there will actually be some level of wind shear that could lead to some large hail, damaging winds, and even a few tornadoes between tomorrow all the way through the end of the week. So this is an area to keep an eye on, even though our jet stream is going to be very flat, which again is not very typical for late April. But by the time we go into this weekend, we are expecting the return of at least one, if not a couple of big storm systems that'll move over the Rockies, which should end up leading to a more organized risk of severe weather. So I think on Sunday or Monday, we might have our next chance for perhaps some sort of outbreak to occur. So this should be our next organized risk of severe weather once we go into Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And this again would be a trough injection right over the Rockies, which means that we should have a lot of turbulent mixing, basically meaning cold and warm air will be mixing throughout the atmosphere in the central and southern plains, which would eventually lead to some significant severe weather back over in areas like the Midwest. And we will talk more about what is upcoming as we go into late this week and the weekend in just a few moments. But I do want to talk more about what's upcoming just over the next few days in terms of severe weather. So we do have a threat of severe weather every single day for the next few days, and it all begins with today, where we do have a marginal risk of severe weather in place in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, and another marginal risk back over in the Dixie Alley from Louisiana back into southeast Tennessee, basically from Chattanooga back through New Orleans, where there is going to be some damaging winds and hail. It's going to be a very isolated risk. Again, this is a level 1 out of 5 risk of severe weather today, but there could be an isolated brief tornado back over in Pennsylvania or Ohio. We do have enough wind shear to the point where we could get a rotating storm, but I don't really think we're going to see much up here. Just stay weather aware, have a tornado action plan ready to go. This is mainly going to be during the late morning and early afternoon. Now by tomorrow, our risk of severe weather is going to be happening in 3 different places. We have 3 different marginal risks of severe weather, one of which is back over in North Carolina and South Carolina, where isolated hail and wind will be possible. In the Midwest, it's the same story, isolated hail and damaging winds possible during the afternoon and evening hours. But over in the southern plains and as well as the high plains, this is where we could have the potential for very large hail, damaging winds, and maybe even an isolated tornado or two. So this is an area that we need to keep a closer eye on, where there will be a potential for some more significant severe weather. But generally speaking, we are not really talking about an outbreak here, but this is an area during the late afternoon and evening where there could be some big hailstones falling and maybe even a couple of tornadoes. Once we go into Wednesday, the risk of severe weather will continue to stay in the high plains where mesoscale features will continue to bring the potential for severe weather. I could see this risk growing further to the east as we get closer to Wednesday, so something to keep an eye on. But generally speaking, again, all of our severe weather over the next several days should mostly be focused in the central and southern plains until we eventually get that big trough ejection as we go into the weekend and next week, which could impact a lot of other areas and will again lead to a more robust threat of severe weather. So here's the timing for showers and thunderstorms for the rest of today. Right around lunchtime today is when I would expect a slight uptick in terms of our threat of severe weather back over in Ohio and Pennsylvania. So keep a close eye out for maybe 1 or 2 rotating storms up there that could produce a little bit of damaging winds and maybe a brief tornado just after lunchtime. I'd say from about 1 p.m. until about 5 p.m. would be our main concern up there. And if you're back over in Tennessee, Alabama, or Mississippi, hailstorms and windstorms will be ramping up this afternoon, mainly damaging winds around 60 miles per hour, and $1.25 to $1.5 sized hail will be a possibility anywhere from about Chattanooga and maybe just south of Nashville all the way back through the Mississippi River Valley. And then eventually by this evening, most of these storms are fizzling out and the threat of severe weather is pretty low, but we will continue to see at least some scattered showers and thunderstorms even into tomorrow morning across the Dixie Alley before eventually this is all clearing out. And then once we go into tossing trampolines on Tacos Tuesday, we do have a more elevated potential for large hail damaging winds and even an isolated tornado risk. These are your significant tornado parameter values as we go into Tuesday afternoon and evening, and the numbers are increasing across West Texas, but overall this is where our dry line is going to be located, and depending on where storms fire, if they fire right along the dry line, there will be a potential for an isolated supercell or two to produce the potential for a tornado. This would be my main area to watch for, basically just south of Lubbock, back over near Midland, Texas. There could be an isolated tornado out of a supercell, but I think large hail will be definitely the main concern. But this is a dry line setup that we are talking about where our dew points are very high back over in West Texas, and then if you're anywhere back over in like New Mexico, for example, the dew points will be much lower. So where those storms initiate on Tuesday and then eventually move to the northeast will be where our greatest threat of tornadoes would be. Again, it's a low threat overall, but we'll probably at least have 1 or 2 tornadoes, with this being a dry line setup and there being enough wind shear. Mid to low level flow should be strong enough as well in West Texas. Other areas are not really talking about much of any low level winds at this point. So this is the timing for severe weather on Tuesday. We will have some scattered showers and thunderstorms near the Gulf Coast with all the moisture that we have currently coming out of the Gulf. But by Tuesday afternoon, there will be some storms firing up back over near that dry line. This will kick off around 5 to 6 p.m. on Tuesday. And notice how we quickly start to see a couple of supercells form. And this is the area where very large hail and an isolated tornado will be possible, mainly around Midland and south of Lubbock, Texas. Eventually by around 7 to 8 o'clock, this threat of severe weather will continue. And if these storms can stay organized, we could see a mesoscale convective system form, which means basically a line of thunderstorms could form as we go into the mid to late evening and overnight hours. And you see how that kind of moves here across western Oklahoma and north central Texas. So we will have to keep an eye on whatever happens here, because this could lead to a damaging wind threat and even an isolated hail threat as that moves towards southwest Oklahoma and north Texas as we go into the overnight hours. But generally our main concern for large hail and a tornado threat would be back over near Midland and just south again of Lubbock on Tuesday. Now beyond Monday and Tuesday, we are talking about quite the big weather pattern change. We'll continue to see a lot of different showers and thunderstorms over the next several days across the Great Plains, where mesoscale features will continue to lead to some scattered severe weather. By Thursday and Friday, we'll just continue to see this weather pattern. Again, notice how messy it is all across the Gulf Coast and the Great Plains. Plenty of showers and thunderstorms are ahead in this area, which will also lead to even some localized flooding, especially in areas that have already had way too much rainfall here over the last 3 weeks. And then eventually by late Friday and Saturday, we might get a slightly more organized low pressure system back over in the Midwest. And if this does happen, there could be a bit more of an organized risk of severe weather in the Ohio Valley, something to keep an eye on Friday, but generally it's not looking like it's super significant at this time. And then by Saturday and Sunday, that is when a low pressure system will try to move over the Rockies, and this will create again turbulent mixing, meaning cold and warm air is going to be mixing across the central and southern plains. And once that happens, this should lead to a more organized risk of severe weather. I think this starts to kick off on Saturday, but will really start to ramp up by Sunday and Monday, and then eventually by Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, the European model has this ejecting further, where we might have a bit more of an organized area of severe weather. But keep in mind that this is still about 8 days out or so from now, so things will definitely change between now and then. But it does look like, again, the end of April here is definitely going to be active, especially if you are in the central or southern plains. And the rest of April is looking hot out there. We are talking about a large area for above average temperatures between Saturday of this weekend all the way through Wednesday of next week. Pretty much much the entire country, other than areas west of the Rockies, will be dealing with above average temperatures for a long period of time. So be ready for this. Make sure that your jacket is put away in the closet, because you probably will not need it here anywhere from the Great Plains all the way back through the East Coast. And as always, thank you all so much for watching today's forecast. If you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We will likely have a video tomorrow talking more in depth about our severe weather upcoming, so make sure to click the bell icon so you're notified with the latest video updates. And also, a video on Wednesday is pretty unlikely. We will likely also not be live tomorrow because I have final exams coming up for my bachelor's in meteorology, so it is going to be a pretty busy next 48 hours for me. But again, we'll have at least a video probably tomorrow morning, and then our next video will likely be on Thursday. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys all again in the next video.